everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to my book chat. I'm host and co-conspirator Melody McAllister. It's been a while since I've had a new book chat, and I'm so glad you're tuning in live or watching the replay. I plan on having more weekly chats, and you can find them on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. I want to give a special shout out to the Alice Keeler Teacher Tech and Thrive in Edu Facebook communities. Tonight, Dr. Henry Turner and Kathy Lopes join me to talk about their book, Change the Narrative: How to Foster an Anti-Racist Culture in Your School. This will probably not be a comfortable conversation for many of us listening, but I encourage you to stay with us, ask some questions, or reflect on those ideas we share. If you are new to the journey of anti-racism or you've been on this path for years, Change the Narrative is a book you will want to read. Both authors will share their lived and professional experiences in this book. They have successfully helped their school community be more inclusive, honor diversity, and challenge white supremacy and those who still fight to keep it centralized. But if you want to know how to honor student voice, leadership, begin personal and staff education in anti-racism, you can become a leader in this journey. For the sake of those you serve, you're going to want to stick around. The idea that pulled me in the most was that it begins as a personal journey and leads to genuine community building where all people are welcome. So we're so glad you're here. Henry and Kathy, thank you for being here tonight to talk about your book, and congratulations on your first year bookversary. It's been in the top 100 in its categories multiple times throughout this year, and it's certainly made an impact. How are you tonight, and can you share a little bit about your background?
Yes. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And crazy that it is our bookversary. So I'm Kathy Lopes, and I am, I'm the co-author of this book. I am also a DEI director in the same school district as Henry. And that is how we met and how we connected and decided to write this book. I think I come to this work and what's in the book as someone who has had a lot of experiences in education, particularly as a child of immigrants and a student of color throughout my entire educational experience, and really being at a point in my life where I'm reflective of those experiences and pursued a career in looking at how can I challenge and disrupt some of the things that I experienced as harmful that still exist today. So that's kind of how we've arrived here. So I have lots to talk about.
I love it. I'm so glad you're here. And this is actually the first time that I'm like meeting you in person. And I'm sorry I've been pronouncing your name incorrectly. So I know I should have asked that before. But so glad you're here. And tell us a little bit about you, Dr. Henry Turner.
Yeah, so similarly work in the same district as Kathy, and I've been a principal for 11 years now. And I came into education as a person of color who learned in a school where I was one of the few students of color in the school, which is something that Kathy and I both shared, and also we both went to the same university. We didn't know each other at the same time, but we lived this experience where we were one of the few people of color in our community, in our school. And that's what drove me into education, was to help make a difference for particularly underrepresented groups, and then led me to be a school leader. And my first year in my current school as principal 7 years ago, the second week of school, we had a group of students who drove around waving the Confederate flag. And another student caught it on videotape and posted it to Facebook, which shows you how long ago this incident was, that Facebook was very relevant then. And it went viral. And students, particularly students of color, wanted to protest this incident. And we learned a lot from that experience. We learned a lot about how our students felt disconnected, and we were able to dive in and learn more about the disparities and disproportionalities that we had in our school, which led us to start to dive into some work about how do we foster connectedness in our school, how do we build relationships with students, and how do we help become a school that where all students feel seen and feel connected. And that's where this book started, was really kind of the things that we learned over this process, and partnering. I always say, like, me as a principal who loves the change process and how to build a community, how to create change in the community, and Kathy's expertise as a social worker the human side, how to build relationships with people. Really was a good match to help people to learn, how to build on, their students, to create an environment in a community where all students feel seen and feel heard, and learn to thrive.
Right. And I know you were talking about like when you first came into this position where you currently are, like it wasn't the way you wanted to start it, right? It was like you wanted to start slow, but then all of a sudden it was like crisis central right when it happened. So, and that's how the book starts, which really, brings the reader in. And just as a writer, before we get really heavy into the book, especially, what was it like working together on this one?
Yeah. So I started. So I knew in 2020 that I needed that I had a book to write, and I was just so fortunate to be able to chat with Dave and Shelley Burgess early on in 2020. I was getting a lot of requests from people who were inspired by the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and we're looking for how to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion in schools. And so I had submitted a proposal for a book and had no idea how it was going to get written. It felt overwhelming. And a colleague who had written a book said, have you considered a co-author? And Kathy and I went and we were chatting, just kind of blow off some steam one night, and it was just clear she was the person. And I have to say that this book is 1,000 times better because of our partnership. We get each other. We have the same vision, and from my perspective, we really were able to talk out the logistics, the challenges of working together, and to dive into it. And we had the same mission. And there are some probably funny stories along the way, but for the most part, it was a time where we just really kept building on each other and providing great feedback that allowed for it to be. I think that's a better book because it has that leadership perspective and that social worker perspective.
Yeah. So yeah, I always acknowledge that this was Henry's baby. This was Henry's vision. And when he had approached me, I had a lot of trepidation about doing something like under someone else's vision. And I didn't want to mess it up or, it to be conflicting. But like Henry said, we always knew what the purpose and the mission of the book was. And we always kind of had these targets. And I think time-wise, we were both really diligent about meeting timelines and expectations and respecting each other's process. I think, as Henry has said, like he's an educator, he has a lot of logistical thinking, he has a lot of experience with some of the structural pieces of a school building. And I have a very, thinking about self-reflection, thinking about relationships, thinking about bringing people along, and how do you combine that in writing? So sometimes what I wrote, he felt like, well, I needed to pull it out a little bit more. And sometimes what he wrote, I felt like he needed to kind of like bring it in a little bit more. So I think we worked through those challenges. And like Henry said, we have a product that really has both of our voices, but is way more comprehensive, not only because of our experiences, but because we were able to really respect each other's process and what really mattered. There were some things that I think we stood really firm on, even though someone say like, can you do this? And we were like, this is important to me. And other things they're like, you're right, I see it your way. That makes a lot of sense. So there was a lot of growth. But I also think at the end of this, he's the only person I've ever wrote a book with. We have this experience that I don't share with anyone else. And it made our personal and professional relationship a lot stronger.
Yeah, and I would just say that, or just say one more thing, is that the feedback that I think we've gotten is from educators who feel like this book is for them, right? Like it is our voice is really tied towards educators about how to actually create some change in their school. And I think again, it has the change side, it has the human side, and it's really focused on on educators, and so I think we were able to build that bridge with our audience.
Yeah, and I just want to say, from just a writing perspective, not even about like just the subject matter, but you both write it in a way that it doesn't seem like it's off on this and then off on that. And I imagine that that would be hard when two people are writing a book. But you do in the book say Kathy shares this or Henry, so we see those personal stories that really add to what you're writing about, which I really appreciate because that's what keeps it from being boring or like too hard to read. It's those personal stories that make it amazing. And this is kind of a hard question to ask because it covers a lot. In fact, the book starts out as like a personal journey, like where you have to dig deep in. And then it comes like, but now you've gone through this, and probably this would be a good book to read throughout a year. Like, I don't know if you should read it like in a get-go. There's just so much to do. But what would you like the main takeaway to be when someone picks it up and reads it, or if somebody shares it? What do you imagine that they would say about it?
So I think one of the things about, and there's a lot of takeaways, but I think one of the things is we wanted a book, and we actually mentioned this, like it's a book that you can revisit, you can return to, that will be applicable at different points in the work. We really wanted to stay away from like a one and done or a how to fix it, because this isn't something that can be fixed, right? Like we can't check boxes. That there's a lot of personal reflection, and we start the book with that. There's a lot of personal reflection that needs to take place in order for you to be committed to the work, understand what the work is, and show up even when it's really hard. So I would say the main takeaway is that this is a process, and it's a guide that you can use ongoing throughout your process. This is not you finish the book, apply what we said, and you've done it. That you understand the level of commitment it takes for change, for shifting a culture, for bringing people along, for exposing a lot of the harm that folks may be oblivious to, depending on your community. So it's a breadth of process and information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember in the beginning of us writing this book, I was presenting at a conference, and a school district said that that equity was part of their school improvement plan that year. And I was like, well, how did it work? And they're like, well, we're exhausted. We don't think we made it much progress, right? And it's like this work, DEI work, is lifelong work, right? This is not something that you're gonna solve in a year. It's not just one little initiative that's going to work. This is the work, right? And so I think that this is a book that you can continue to come back to. And I agree with you. Like, I think it's important for people to read it cover to cover, but I also think that it's an opportunity to come back and to say, like, okay, I need a workshop around racial identity with my staff, or our coaches need an activity to help them think about how they can be upstanders during a game, right? Like, there's an activity for that. And so I think that the book serves as a dual purpose. One, a place for people to be able to read and to learn and to grow, but also to come back to for, quick tips on how to address a specific situation.
Definitely, especially hard conversations. You guys really give a lot of good tips for that, and you address this in your book too. It's just good leadership. Like, it is just great leadership. And in our business, we have a lot of hard conversations, and we should be having a lot of hard conversations because you can't change the narrative without that. Something that you said, Kathy, that really stood out to me is like the things that we are oblivious to. And you address this in the book. There are so many things as a white person that I was oblivious to until I began this work a few years ago. And a few years ago, I can say that because I was oblivious to most of it for most of my life. And one of the things that I get a lot of pushback on is we shouldn't be talking about this. Kids are too young, and you address this as well. Or we are just making it worse by constantly talking about this. And that's just a myth. And that's just something to keep us quiet. And I love how you talk about that in the book, because we have to be talking about this. The thing, though, is that it's very uncomfortable. And most of us, we don't want to be in any sort of discomfort. And if we've never had to be sitting in our discomfort, then we especially don't understand why it's important. So my next question is, when we're doing this work for DEI, how can we get comfortable with the discomfort?
So I think this is a lot of where my social work lens comes into this work, and how do I bring people in? And so much of it is about perspective, right? And when I hear comments like that, and I hear them frequently, like this is harmful to children, or they're not ready, we're making it worse. And my question is, well, who are you centering? Because my experience as one of the only Black children in a white community meant that I was harmed when people weren't talking about it, right? That I actually was uncomfortable most of the time in my experience. So if you actually center those that you want to support and uplift and create spaces of welcoming and belonging, then you have to step away from what's good for you, what's right for you. And that's a privilege that many people have. Well, I just want to avoid it. I don't want my children to be exposed. Well, are you prioritizing your child over that student who is actually experiencing it every day, whose parents experience it every day when they come into the community, whose staff, one of the only educators of color in your department, experiences every day? So it's helping people really shift that perspective and understand what is the significance of the work, and what privilege do you have to be able to put this off. And if you say you're committed about the work, you have to do some self-reflection and kind of, reckon with that a little bit, to get deep into this.
I absolutely agree with that, and I also think it's about starting small, right? And so, we both actually talk about our yoga practice in the book, about how do we, kind of take some small steps to build that discomfort. And one of the smallest steps that we made that had a huge impact is that we gave our students the opportunity to write their names phonetically in our student information system, so that when on the first day of school, teachers were able to pronounce students' names correctly, right? And I always say, no one is going to a school committee meeting complaining about a school that allows students to pronounce their names phonetically, right? Like, these are small steps that you can do to help students to feel seen, to feel heard in your school, to feel like they're connected, and they're not controversial. And as you start to see the response that students make when they feel connected in your school, the more you're going to be willing to dive into, more challenging situations and issues, some that may receive some more pushback. But start with the things that are low hanging fruit, right? Like, allow students to print to write their names phonetically. Like, that's an easy thing to do. Help allow students to play the name game, right? Like, how did you get your name? Like, those are ways to share your own story. Like, those are great ways to start small, where it's not controversial, and then allows you to see, wow, these small actions are really powerful and make students to feel connected, and therefore I'm going to dive further into it.
Right. And something that came to my mind when you were saying that, like, that it's controversial, that what we're talking about is so controversial, when it really is just treating people with human dignity and starting with their names. I mean, how many adults do we talk to that have a name from, another country? They're, not from the United States, and they're so used to the American way that they say their name that when you're like, no, 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 I really want to know your name and I want to practice it. Like, that is just something that here in our culture that we just don't do enough of. So I do appreciate that small step. And, that's it seems like a small and easy step, but it's just like the entryway into better humanity and better relationships, like you said.
Right.
And speaking of students, another thing that I absolutely love about this book is that you have to center it on the students. And you even said that some students don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. They've gone through 13 years of education and no one's ever asked them how they felt, or they've always been as victims sometimes of the racism that is happening. No one's addressed it about them, that it's used in politically correct speech, and so they never feel seen or heard. So I want to ask you this question: how important is student leadership in anti-racism?
I'll let Henry go first, because I know this is his wheelhouse.
So I think this is the work, right? This is critical. And the story that I shared about the Confederate flag is that two things that I learned from that situation. One was that our students, when they have a voice, can really transform a community. And one was, they did a protest, and we created a safe environment for them to be able to do it. But secondly, one of our one of our programs, our Design for Visual Communication, which is a career technical education program, created, a piece of public art to demonstrate what our values are in that situation. And another situation is that we had another time we had some social media racist comments that had been made, and we thought we had investigated it appropriately. We thought we had addressed it appropriately. In our we had met with our Black Student Union, and we had asked them, for some feedback, and they said, "We don't think you did a great job." And we said, "What do you mean? We did all these things." They said, "Yeah, you checked off all the boxes, but you weren't angry about it. We were angry about it." And that was a great message to us to realize, like, as administrators, we usually try to take a neutral perspective, but they needed to hear us to say, this is a violation of our rules, right? So there's three ways. One is, like, you got to allow students to demonstrate their anger in a way that's safe, right? And in a way that is authentic for them. You have to allow students to be able to create change in the culture, right? We always ask students, what is your legacy? How are you going to leave an impact in your school? And then third is that you got to allow them to provide feedback, right? So when they said to us, give us this feedback, we don't think you did a great job. And we now have a human rights council where it's a group of students where whenever there is a hate incident, our assistant principals share their process for investigation with the students, and they give us feedback. Or they also say, like, well, we heard this, like, it's an opportunity for them to give us feedback so we get better, right? So there's a third opportunity for students to be able to help the school grow. And that's authentically what student leadership is not just putting them in places where you're giving them a name, like you're a captain, but actually allowing them to make their school that they care about better. And you creating opportunities for them to be able to do that. And so I think it's vital because it also allows them to be able to feel empowered to create change when they go into the larger society.
Yeah, and I think, and to add to that, like, I think that so often people go into this work with this idea of what they're supposed to be doing, right? Oh, this is an issue, so let me spend all this energy without actually inviting students, without actually getting their voices and saying, like, what do you really want to change here? So sometimes you might have a group of parents or educators working on something, and the students are like, well, no one's paying attention to this thing. There's actually a much bigger issue to me personally, right? So for me, anytime you're doing advocacy work or coalition work or co-conspirator work, you have to bring in the voices of those that you actually want to support and serve, and to really understand what the student experience is. That's something that I know for a fact as a student, I was never asked. What is your experience? What would make it better for you? What is hard for you? Never. And how impactful that would have been for me to, one, feel safe enough to have a voice, and then actually see change happen because of something I contributed to the conversation.
I'll just say one more thing.
Yeah.
Is that just even today, Kathy said this is my wheelhouse. This is like, sorry. But just even today, like, we're having a stand up against hate rally tomorrow that Kathy in her office is putting on throughout our district. And, I got a teacher who's leading in our school shared with me a speech of a student who's criticizing me personally as the administrator, right? Like, I recognize as a school leader, I am the position of power for our students, and regularly I'm going to be criticized for it. And like, we have to allow for, kind of like push against our ego to allow for students to be able to criticize us. That's important for them to be able to grow in their experience.
That takes a lot of something that I've never seen, to be honest, in action. And there's two things that really resonate with me. Number one, you can literally not change the narrative if you don't have student leadership or student voice involved. It will always be the way that it is, because, like you were saying, Kathy, we came from a system where none of our voices were really honored, and it was just completely authoritarian, and it was based on, you are a little person and your voice doesn't matter. So it's And I think that I love the work that both of you do, and it's become regular for you to be in this culture. But for those of us who've never experienced it, it's like it still kind of blows me away. And congratulations again on all that work, because the students and the families involved in your school community, um, I mean, what else can you say? Changing the narrative. They are becoming leaders, and I love it. I love it. So,
Yeah.
one thing I want to ask you to do, this is absolutely my favorite part of my book chats, is when I ask the authors to read their favorite parts of the book. So I'm going to go mute. In fact, I'm actually going to drop off, but I'll come back on. Don't worry, I'm controlling everything. And I would love for you all to just kind of talk about what you're going to read it, and then I'll come back on when you're finished.
Okay. All right. You wanna go?
Go ahead.
Oh no, you go.
You want me to go? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to just read a section from our introduction, which is about a student who came back to be on a panel as a college student to a group of our students who are part of a affinity group for high achieving students of color. And one of the common threads that the panel talked about was feeling like they didn't belong when they arrived on the college campus, and feeling like imposters, having this idea of imposter syndrome when they arrived on campus. And so this one student, we call her Lamari in the book, she talks about arriving in this statistics class, a large lecture hall statistics class, African American female, and realizes that, and doesn't think that she belongs in the class, and later realizes that actually not only does she belong, but she's one of the stronger students in the class, and finds herself tutoring a group of white male students in the class, and realizes the historical significance of that. And so not only is tutoring them, but realizes that this is a powerful moment. And she reflects on what she had learned in her high school experience to prepare her for this. And so what we write in the book is that the narrative about Lamari is one of empowerment. Similar narratives showed up in every story from the students on this panel, and the connection and validation were palpable to the 100 current students in the room. Their shared story is that they attended a high school that was committed to forming an anti-racist culture in a district that was committed to racial justice. While not immune to racism, these students demonstrated that a commitment to anti-racism supports the success of students in marginalized groups. But anti-racism is not just about these students. Rather, anti-racist cultures benefit all students, because these cultures believe that all students thrive in a learning environment that, one, understands the inequities that exist due to racist structures and systems, two, commits to dismantling racism so that students know their school loves them, and three, helps students feel empowered to create change so that they will excel. This is the narrative that we should be looking for in all of our schools. This narrative is possible. And what I love about this passage is that, to me, this is the vision that we still strive for in our school. And when we receive pushback and resistance about our focus on making sure that all students feel empowered, is realizing that the product that we create when we create this culture is not only that is it good for those who have been traditionally marginalized, but actually those who have been are in privileged groups are able to recognize how to raise up others who may not have the same advantages as them, and that is good for society.
I also often, when people talk to me about the book, that story is one that I get a lot of feedback on. People say, "I know that student," or "I was that student." So it's definitely a story that resonates with folks, and I've heard that frequently. So I'm going to share near the end in the conclusion. There are a couple passages in between, but I think just for the purpose of this, and this is really just about after you get to the end of this book and there's all this information and you're overwhelmed and might not know where to begin or have started and feel challenged. It's just a reminder again of what we were talking about, that like this work is ongoing and there are highs and there are lows, there are pauses, there's accelerated points in it. So just to kind of capture parts of what we said in the book. We should expect resistance to manifest when we fight racism. Historically, it always has. Yet it's just as important to remember that it's a necessary part of the work. And with resistance, we're forced to pause and reflect on our strategy and impact. It allows us to become clear on our purpose and more determined to push through. Can we trust our colleagues, students, and families to continue with this work when the resistance becomes more intense and more personal? We believe many will. There are many educators, students, and families who understand that complex structural change is hard, time-consuming, and endless. But they also understand that the status quo is not acceptable, and they're ready to confront the work. We just have to help each other do it together. The work of an anti-racist educator is to keep coming back to this work and to continue to recommit. However, it's also to inspire and help others to do the same, to be open to changing both our individual practice and the structures of our school. The change must be daily work that includes both reflection and risk-taking, and it will most definitely involve making mistakes. We believe that we're in a special moment in education. Moving past the COVID-19 pandemic gives us an opportunity to reimagine our schools and see the possibility. We have new opportunities to shift our practices and school structures to make them more anti-racist than our status quo. The more we're fighting racism, the more we'll notice the bend in the arc of the universe. And although justice may still seem far away, progress can always be found if you are looking. So.
Wow, that was great. I love it. This is why it's my favorite. And going along with what you just read, this is a question it's a real question. What kind of resistance have you encountered since this book was published?
So I'll start this one because I think Henry's constantly experiencing more resistance because he is the face of his school building. But I think that even writing a book like this, or doing this work, right? I'm a DEI director, that resistance can show up in a lot of ways. In some ways, there are those educators and those families that say, we don't need this, our children aren't ready for this, this is actually causing more harm. And sometimes that looks like, letters to the school committee and to the mayor, or the social media posts that attack you. And other times it just looks like people disengaging with the work or trying to sabotage the work, which makes it really hard, and which is why it's really important to build up this culture, this community that understands the value of this work. So when that resistance shows up, you can tap into the larger percent of people that want to do this work to kind of overshadow the resistance. So the resistance, it can be really harmful, and Henry may share a little bit of that, right? We are people of color, we are public facing, we do get targeted by white folks and by people of color, and that could be really hard personally, but I think also professionally, the ways that people just try to sabotage this work through public records requests or articles against you or removing funding or shutting things down is a consistent practice, and that's historic, right? I mentioned that it's historically, when you're moving the needle, the dissenters are going to get louder. So you have to figure out how to build coalition to push through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was recently an experience where a parent had reached out to me and was disagreeing with some of the practices in our school and around this work. And the way that I responded to him was that you regularly tell me how much your kid loves being at our school. It's actually the work that we do in these other spaces that allow for other kids to feel that same way. And when you work and live in a diverse school, is to recognize that kids connect with adults and connect with their school in a variety of ways. And we need to if we're going to be truly student-centered, we need to provide those spaces for them. I would say that, I always reflect on Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he talks about, the supporters being the biggest threats to progress.
Mm.
And, I think that sometimes as educators, it's those who may believe in, all students, but say, I'm not going to reflect on how my bias actually hurts students. Or, I think that I'm going to win the anti-racist Olympics, and I'm going to judge all the other, educators in my school because they're not as, as focused on this work as me. Right. And that puts down all of their colleagues. Like those folks can be, much more, can negatively impact a school community much more than a group of people who are just, so out of it that they're not going to support the work that you're doing. Right. As educators, we have to be self-reflecting. We have to recognize our vulnerability and realize that growth only occurs when we recognize where we need to improve.
Yeah. I've never thought about getting a gold in the Olympics, but I will say that it's pretty human to uplift yourself, or elevate yourself when, and like you said, it really is detrimental to the work because that is absolutely the antithesis of what you're trying to do. And there's always a sincere apology because we all make mistakes and we're all very human, and that is also a part of this journey. And I really appreciate. I felt very. I don't even know how to say this. It's sometimes hard when you are, especially as a white person, and especially as a white person who grew up very indoctrinated, just like everybody else, about our role and our privileges and being oblivious to that, and then coming to a 180 from that, where a lot of us have been, and not knowing, like, are we doing it right? Are we going in the right direction? And then also when you talk about reflecting on all the mistakes that we've made in the past, and just in the past, and in our journey. And so when I was reading this, it kind of lit another fire under my ass, just to be, frank. I was just like, okay, like I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And when I thought maybe I was pushing too hard, I wasn't, because this absolutely has to be a vision that you wake up with. And it has to be a vision that you go to bed with, because it is a part of who you are. And you can't let others tell you that you're too much, because you're always going to be that way, and then, yeah. So anyway, I appreciated that as somebody who was reading it and learning and reflecting, as I was reading your book. And something that you also talk about, and I didn't, preface you guys with this question, but I know it's important when you are in this work. Henry, you talk about this a lot. You have to have radical self-care, because you will get burned out so easily. What do you both do? What do you mind sharing what you do to, help yourself stay, not get burned out? Was it very eloquent?
No, I appreciate you saying that, because I do agree that this is lifelong work, and you gotta keep reminding yourself that it's one step at a time. Like, we're going to make mistakes all the time, right? And for me, it's being able to disconnect from the work, like spending time with my family, doing things that bring me joy, being able to collaborate with people who I can kind of share my stuff with which, people like both of you, who I feel like I can talk to. And like, that's what rejuvenates me, but also recognizing that, like, I'm not going to fix this tomorrow. Right. Like, I can sleep tonight, because I know that, this is long-term work, and I need to get rest.
Yeah, I think the word joy really resonates with me, that I'm constantly immersing myself in joy, whether it's being in community with people I love and dance and, the sun, and being outside and walks and music and all of those things. So that is very much a part of my life. And I do so unapologetically, just a joke. My birthday is a month celebration, and I was posting and people like, still? I was like, birthday, I'm gonna do it how I want, right? Um, but I think the other piece is, because so much of my work is trying to push people to see or to understand or to get better to process issues, that in my personal life, I really have built a community of like-minded people where I don't have to go around convincing my circle and my tribe and my family of why, that everyone is participating in their own way in liberation and anti-racism and dismantling white supremacy, that I wouldn't have the capacity to show up to work every day and deal with folks that I constantly have to convince or push, and then have to do that in my personal life. So when I'm with my people, it's just understood. We see something, we're like, we get it, we know what needs to happen, and we respect the way each other shows up in it. But that's something I've also cultivated later on in life through my adulthood. I've kind of curated a community that kind of elevates me and sustains me.
Yeah. And that is I feel like I feel I'm in the same kind of circle, but it's been a painful, like, burning off of people.
Yes. Mhm.
Painful sometimes, but then also in the long run, very beneficial, and
Yes.
it is helpful.
Yes.
I'm going to skip a couple of questions. Are you guys okay on time? I love this conversation. I'm not ready to end it, but I want to respect your time, if that's
Yeah.
okay. Um, this is a funny question maybe to some, but did you write this book for white people?
So, we both work in schools that are majority white,
Mhm.
right? We work and we grew up in schools that are majority white. So we do believe that we're able to write to a broad range, and we're able to help white people who may not have many interactions with people of color to understand their role in anti-racism. So, I think that we write this book for people who are new to this work, while also being able to engage with people who are who have experience in this work. And I definitely have interacted with educators who are people of color who have struggled with educating students of color. And so, they were definitely of mine when I was writing this book as well. So I don't think it's just for white people, but I do think that it's about how do we, uplift people who are interested in being leaders in this work, while also, continuing to challenge people who are engaged in this work. And I'll just tell a quick story. Is that I remember meeting with our faculty of color affinity group, and they felt like all of our workshops were for white educators. And I remember walking out of there going like, what the heck? We've been thinking about them all the time, and like, why don't they come up with the workshops? And like, ding dong, ding dong, was like basically like, yes, they should be.
Oh, I think we lost him.
Yeah.
I can I can hop in. I don't know when he'll come back, but I do think yes, and we both wrote it with understanding what those communities are. We lost you for a second, Henry. Sorry. I think it's somewhere around Ding Dong. So
I was like, ding dong, like let them run the workshops. That's all.
yes. But so absolutely, it's for folks. I mean, like a large diversity of white folks who want to do the work, white folks to just kind of recognize some things, do some reflection. Same for folks of color and the racial identity and the unpacking of white supremacy culture that people of color have been indoctrinated in as well, myself included. But one of the things I've also experienced with this book, I did my very first book talk was in this community in Boston, a Black community, urban community. And there were a lot of just families and friends who had came, and not necessarily people in education. And what happened after that, where all these folks were like, this actually gave me something to go back and advocate, to go back and speak up for my child in their school system, for me to actually say something to educators in my space. So although I never thought like of that audience writing it, right? People who just live this life every day, there was a level of empowerment. I had a friend say he was having an issue with his son, and he showed up to the teacher conference. It was like, my friend wrote this book, and and he felt really empowered to kind of speak about some of the things he had been experiencing, maybe didn't have the words for, or the full understanding or context. So that is another community that I think has responded to this book that I don't believe was on our radar when we initially started.
Wow. I love that. Everything you guys have said tonight has been wonderful. And it's okay. Like, even if you said, yes, we were this, if you were just like, yes, this is for white people,
Yes.
but statistically, it is over 80% of white people in the school system.
Yes.
So statistically, we really should be the ones reading this and leading the change. It is really up to us to lead the change, which is also something that you put in the book. So as a white person, thank you for writing this book. I want to ask, we're getting closer to the end, but there's two questions I want to ask. Are you doing any book studies? I know you guys did a book study on this last summer. Are there any book studies coming up, or can we expect that? Or do you have the other book studies that you've done available?
So we have a course online that people can engage in, and also if they go to henryjturner.com, they have guiding questions for the book. And there's going to be stuff that we're going to do over the summer that will engage with our audience. Even though this is the 1-year anniversary, like we are still seeing that this book is continuing to grow, and so we're excited about still engaging with our audience and growing our audience and helping people to engage with the book.
Awesome. And the last question that I love to ask my guests are just, what is some wisdom that you'd like to share? And it can be about anything. It can be about the book. It can be about just what you're experiencing daily in your life. But would love to hear what y'all want to share.
I think, oh gosh, there's so much, right? But I mean, something about if you want to do this work and you want to be committed to this work, you really have to engage with this community. You really have to learn to understand that you approaching this from a savior complex, approaching this ego place actually does more harm. And which is, again, my social work lens is like really understand what is happening and build kind of this empathy and relationship and this personal connection to why you're doing this. This doesn't feel like work to me. This feels like lifelong. I'm living out just my legacy, and I'm meant to do it, and I really believe that. But it's been a lot of my life experiences and the places I've gone and the steps that I've taken to be here and feel like I can show up in full authenticity and recognize there's still a lot to learn and be able to talk about the privileges that I do have based off of how I grew up or my complexion and all of that, right? So I think my wisdom is to really show up in this work authentically. You have to be in it. You have to be in it and understand your why, and not just do it to kind of feel better or to kind of check off a box. That there has to be a real connection as to what you hope to come out of it.
I think that is very well said. And I would say that I think that, we see a lot of people talking about as educators that we just need to talk about sunshine, right? Like talk about the happy things. And that actually misses the students who don't see the sunshine. And that our work is really not about what we say, but it's about how do we engage with those students? How do we build relationships with them, right? And so our work is really to understand who our students are. How do we raise them up? How do we make them the story and not us the story?
Right.
And I think that if we keep that as our lens, that we're actually going to see the joy and the excitement that we all need as educators. This has been a really hard time to be an educator the last several years, right? And we know what our challenges are, whether it's mental health, whether it's students, not feeling connected. And right now it's about like, how do we make sure we know who they are, and allow them to be the story of the school success.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much, Henry and Kathy, for joining me tonight. Don't go away. I'm going to put the outro on in just a second, but don't jump off if you don't have to. But if you've watched this live or the replay, we really appreciate you. This has been a phenomenal discussion. I think a courageous conversation, honestly, and I appreciate your work that you do and that you share with all of us. And I'm looking forward to continuing learning with you guys. And I want to say to anybody that's watching, if you get to read their book or you choose to read their book, please leave a 5-star review, because that's what we do when we love our authors' books. We support them in that way. But thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate you. I hope to see you all next week with a new book, but this one is going to stay with me for a little bit, as it should, and it will be something that I do revisit. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you again. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.